Welcome to the free agent edition of Let's Talk Ball. I'm Thad Brown along with Carl Jones. Day one almost in the books. Bills still have some time to add another player. You never know. It's been a pretty busy day, but the Bills did add two players, and we're going to talk here about the number one guy in terms of payment and probably in terms of impact on the team. That's wide receiver Josh Palmer. And look, this is a guy who played 4 years with the Chargers, had a great season in 2022. Maybe not great for him. 72 catches, 700 and some yards. A guy that I know the fantasy community has kind of been waiting to break out for year after year and never did it with the Chargers. The thing that Bills fans latched onto today, Carl, was his ability to separate. And we're going to talk about the particular stat that's going around. But you and I both took some time to watch him today. Give me your breakdown about the type of guy you see when it comes to what he does in terms of how he runs his routes, how he gets free, and maybe how he doesn't get free.
Yeah, he's a very violent guy at the top of his routes. And what I mean by that, for those at home, when you break off a slant, the top of the route where you're about to break in, or when you run an in route when you're about to break in or out or post, whatever that thing, he is very violent when he does it. It's not lackadaisical. You see some receivers who kind of round things out. You saw that several times. I know the clip I tweeted out on X earlier where it was him up against Pat Surtain, the reigning defensive player of the year, and he was very violent on getting a big corner like Pat Surtain off of him. So I think that's one of the things that he brings to the table. I'm very excited to watch him at St. John Fisher in one-on-ones because I think that is one skill set that is definitely going to translate in a one-on-one setting.
He looked like a guy that would dominate those one-on-ones, those one-on-ones with nobody else around, just you and the DB. He's not the guy I want to do my reps against if I'm a corner for the Bills in training camp. But I saw the same as you. This is a guy that certainly can win, and when he does win, he can do it impressively. Very good with the intermediate routes. It seemed like the 12 and 50-yard ins and outs, that's his wheelhouse. That's his comfort zone, being able to create space there. I also like what he did with some deep routes. He does a nice job of seeing what the leverage is with the safety and going away from it, using it to his advantage. He's not super fast, a 4.5 40, but I think he's smart enough to get open, down the field. So I think he's a pretty solid player. Now, the thing that kind of, again, that went around on social media today was the fantasy points data stat that he's top 10 as a separator against man coverage. I did not, on the eye test, see a guy who's top 10. I saw a guy who's competent. I saw a guy who I think is a professional starting NFL receiver. But Carl, when it comes to separation data, and to make this point, I kind of underline this point, this one site has him top 10. Well, Next Gen Stats says in terms of average separation, he wasn't even in the top 100. So when it comes to separation data, how should we read these very conflicting points of view?
You said, I mean, just look at it however you want to look at it. If you want to think he's a great player, look at one side. If you don't think he's that great, look at the other. But in all actuality, every site grades it differently. And I don't know how fantasy data grades it, but I know Next Gen, for example, I think it's maybe at the top of the route, or I forget exactly how they grade it, but no two sites do it the same way. So that's why there's some discrepancies in the different sites. But I do want to add some context to separation data because I remember last year where some people were saying like, oh my gosh, Khalil Shakir is high, or Keon Coleman at some points in the year was at least average amongst the NFL. And I do want to say, hey, some guys see press coverage more often. By nature, their separation data is going to be a little bit lower. Some guys face a bunch of off coverage. Some guys are the third down guy on third coverage, so they're getting coverage rolled to them. Some players face a third corner. I know out in Los Angeles, Ladd McConkey was obviously their best weapon, and Quentin Johnston, who isn't great, he was by far their second receiver in targets. So I do want to caution and push back and say, hey, I don't think Josh Palmer is third down, 3rd and 6. We go to him every single time like they did with Stephon Diggs. But like you said, I think he's professional. I think that he is probably their best guy in terms of separation and winning at the top of their routes, which they sorely needed in that wide receiver room.
I always am impressed and like to follow the analytic levels when it comes to breaking down a receiver. And we talked about this, I think, a little bit more when it comes to a defensive back. You can throw numbers out left and right. There isn't one real number that kind of identifies what a receiver is. So I think you got to kind of look at all the data points. And the concerns with me with Palmer, when you start looking at some of the more accumulatory or traditional stats, this is a guy that's had 1 year where he's had 40 catches as a receiver. This is a guy that is not, dangerous after the catch. This is a guy that the Chargers, who don't have, as you pointed out, a ridiculous stable of receivers, let walk. Now, maybe the money was too high for them. I don't know their cap situation, but this is not a guy that the Chargers were dying to keep, a guy that had 4 years with a really good quarterback and had only been really productive in one of those years. It doesn't mean he's not going to be good in Buffalo, but the data points we have suggest to us that this is a guy that is a free agent for a reason and should not be expected to come to Buffalo and just dominate, especially year one. I don't care what the scheme is, what the quarterback is.
It's a running bit that I've had that like every free agency, really good or even good receivers, they don't hit the open market. Like teams are so scared. They're fearful of allowing probably their first and second, and even third best receivers hit the open market because they know teams are willing to throw anything at them. You see the New England Patriots today throwing a boatload of money at players who probably shouldn't be paid top 10 in their position. And the same thing will happen with really good receivers. I know that when I was with you a while ago, you'd be like, oh my gosh, my bad. I just got breaking news. Homeboy Andre Cisco signing with the Jets. So shout out to Syracuse.
Hey, good for
1 year.
Cisco, man. Yeah. That was some people were talking about that too. Good for him, man.
Yeah, shout out to Syracuse for that. But I say all that to say, going in, my expectations weren't high for the Bills to get some elite ball winner at every single. He can be great at the intermediate, short, and deep. They just needed a professional to kind of round out their wide receiver room.
And that's why there's two ways to look at this. There's who is the player and how good is he? How good do we think he's going to be? But then there's secondly, how does he fit with the Bills? And when you look at what this team needed, this was a team last year that did not get elite play from anyone on the team at receiver other than maybe Khalil Shakir, a team that went out and traded for Amari Cooper, and he was mostly irrelevant. Did it bother them on offense? No, they scored 30 points just about every game. They basically scored 30 in the AFC Championship game. They lost in Kansas City. So they didn't need to go out and find a Devontae Adams and DK Metcalf. Would those guys have been better? Sure. But for what Josh Palmer does to be able to just fill in, be an X receiver, be competent, be professional, I think those things are very reasonable to accept or to expect from this year. They did their job. Maybe did they pay a little too much? Sure. But the money was always a little bit dicey. It's always funny, in terms of what's real, what's not. And Carl, you kind of laid out, I think, really, really succinctly why the Josh Palmer move, no matter how good a player we might think he is, works really well or could for the Bills.
Yeah, I put it out on X earlier. Think of wide receiver rooms like a basketball lineup where you kind of should strive for varying body types at every single position. The Bills have the big. That's Keon Coleman, the ball winner at any area of the field. And you can even kind of put Dawson Knox in that category for a different reason, not necessarily on the outside. They have their guards. They have their 1 and 2 and Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel, those guys who can slash and do some of the underneath work. But they didn't have a legit wing last year. I think part of that is due to the fact that they wanted Dalton Kincaid to be that do-it-all guy. They wanted him to be that slasher from the wing. He didn't take that step. But they truthfully never had that on the outside at receiver. And that's where an X guy, big body, I believe 6'2", 2+ on the outside like a Josh Palmer, just fits in the room and completes the room. Is the room the Cincinnati Bengals? No. But it makes the room professional, and it allows some different things that they can do on offense that they never had last year. I mean, when you think back to that Kansas City game, how many screen passes did they throw against a Chiefs secondary that didn't have, outside of Trent McDuffie, a bunch of guys that you should be fearful of? That says a lot about what the Bills felt about their own receivers in the house last year.
I think I want to circle over and over and over the versatile part, the versatile wing who can do it all part, because Palmer can be that. He's not super fast, but has proven his ability to win down the field. He can, again, like I said, I think win down the field with his brain. He's good in the intermediate. He does catch some screens. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of after the catch juice there, but he's improved in that area too. So there's a variety of routes he can run, ways he can impact the team. And I think that's where this move, again, makes a lot of sense for the Bills. I think here's a question for you. Sitting here right now, knee-jerk reaction, and I know Mac Hollins going is a little bit a part of this. Is the receiver room better right this second for the Bills than it was last year?
Am I banking on any growth from Keon Coleman?
You can answer that however you want.
I would say yes, just because it's more complete. Do I think it's more? I think it's a little bit more dynamic. Do I think it's great by any means? No, I still would probably put him in the bottom third of the NFL. But we've talked about this ad nauseum. Quarterbacks like Josh Allen are kind of exponential. They uplift wide receiver rooms maybe above what they are, and you saw that last year with Mac Hollins. So I think the wide receiver room is better. But like you mentioned like 5 times already, I didn't need the wide receiver room to be great. They just needed to be a little bit more professional than what they were last year.
I agree with you. I think that's the right answer. I think what I would say is they're not as good as the receiver room we thought we were going to get when the Bills traded for Amari Cooper, But the Cooper that actually played for Buffalo, I think they've improved with getting Josh Palmer out. Not by a lot, but they didn't need to improve by a lot. They just had to kind of fill that spot. All right, the other signing today for the Bills, Michael Hoecht, a defensive something. This is a guy that went to Brown, the Ivy League school, started as a 300-pound defensive tackle. The Rams were like, you're way too athletic for this. Slimmed him down to like 265. Now he plays kind of a hybrid edge, a 3-4 edge, little linebacker, even played some slot corner. I don't know why they ever thought that was a good idea. But a guy who has the magic V word for the Bills. He's versatile. He can do a lot of things. I wasn't, Carl, overly impressed with his ability as a pass rusher. He's a great run defender, though. And I think him and Greg Rousseau on first and second down on either edge could be really, really fun. And speaking of fun, this is a guy that Madden fans might know a little bit.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So when he was you mentioned it earlier where he was 300 pounds and slimmed down. Back when he was at his 300 pounds days and he lined up a defensive tackle, his speed was like in the 80s, which you're like, hold on. I can do something funky with him. I can line him up at D tackle, have him off, drop deep and all that good type of stuff. That's my first exposure to Michael Hoecht 2-3 years ago. It was him and Aaron Donald. And I'm like, bet we're going to have Aaron Donald go here. Michael Hoecht bounce back. Man, I was out there having so much fun with the Rams defense. But I think that kind of speaks to his athleticism. I don't know his ceiling as a player. I think so far we haven't seen really anything too extreme off the edge that you're fearful of or that you have to game plan around. And the way that the Bills have this 4-down front, I don't know how much versatility he's actually going to be able to show here in Buffalo. But he is a freak athlete, no exaggeration. I think his RAS score, which basically kind of profiles how athletic you are, was in like the 9.5 range.
9.65 out of 10 is what it was.
Yeah, that's freak for someone who at the combine was 300 plus. So I say all that to say, I don't know how good he's going to be, but I do know that he is a versatile piece that has lined up all over the defensive front, backer. Sometimes he wants to be Taron Johnson. It wasn't that effective. Don't worry about it. Don't think that they're going to try to put him out there. Regardless, he's a really fun chess piece that I don't know how the Bills are going to utilize, but it's unique they brought him.
And I think that the upside is that you don't know what you could get out of him. Literally, you don't know even what position he's going to play. The negative side for me is this sounds like a guy that I might drop into like the Eagles defense. We already have a ready-made group, and I can have fun with him moving around. When you're going to spend $8 million on a guy like this, you need him to serve a role for you. You can't just say we're going to joker him up and let him play whatever he wants. He needs to be, the edge on the force defender on a first or second down, or he needs to be, the extra rusher, the third or fourth rusher that you can count on to get some production. And as a pass rusher, really, he had one move. It was a bull rush. And it's not a surprise. This guy came to the NFL as a defensive tackle. He's not going to have a well-rounded edge rushing game. So maybe there's a lot of upside there. But how the Bills use him is going to be, you want to talk about a guy you want to see at Fisher? I want to see what the heck they're going to do with Michael Hoecht in training camp this year.
One last thing on Hoecht, and actually it's funny because I don't know where they're going to put him for 101s. You going to cover tight ends or you going to go do 101s? I have no idea. I do want to say, though, in terms of like what the Rams thought of him, he played 900 snaps in 2023. And then, as we all know, the Rams brought in a bunch of youngins. They brought in Jared Verse and a couple other edge guys, and his snaps dropped all the way to 600. So clearly they didn't think that he was an every down player. Now, 600 isn't nothing to sneeze at, but his snaps still took a big hit. So I do want to caution and say I don't know if the Bills view him as an every down player, even though the money kind of says like they think they're going to use him at least 2 out of the 3 downs every series.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think who he is and how much they paid him leave a lot of doors open to what he potentially could be with the Bills. All right, as always, you can check out Let's Talk Ball at rochesterfirst.com or WIVB.com. We're also wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, whatever, and on YouTube. Carl and I will be back as the Bills continue to make moves and we get towards the draft. I'm sure we'll talk about all these youngins that are about to be in the league. A whole lot of fun to do every single season. For Carl Jones, I'm Thad Brown. Thanks for watching and listening to Let's Talk Ball. We'll see you next time.